told yourself, all right, 21 days, that's all it takes. New habit, here I come. Yeah, we've all been there. But what if I told you that catchy little time frame, well, it might actually be leading us down the wrong path.
It's amazing, isn't it, how this idea of 21 days has just completely permeated, how we think about habits.
Totally. But where did this magical number even come from?
Well, it all goes back to, believe it or not, a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz back in the 1950s.
Plastic surgery. Not exactly the first thing that comes to mind when I think about forming good habits.
Right. But Maltz, he was a sharp guy, and he started noticing this pattern with his patients. After surgery, they'd often take about 21 days to kind of adjust to their new look, to feel comfortable with it. And the thing is, he saw something similar with folks who had amputations, too.
Wait, really?
Yeah, phantom limb sensations, they tended to decrease around that same time frame, about 21 days. So he starts thinking, maybe there's something to this whole adjustment period idea, but, thinking bigger than just physical changes.
Okay, so that makes sense. But his book, it was a huge bestseller, right? Did he actually come right out and say, 21 days, guaranteed, new habit?
That's the thing. His book sold over 30 million copies. Can you believe that? But he emphasized a minimum of 21 days.
Minimum. Okay, so not quite a hard and fast rule then.
Exactly. More like, hey, this is when I start seeing things shift, but your mileage may vary. But you know how it goes? Those little nuances, they get lost in translation.
Yeah, we like things simple, digestible, a number we can latch on to.
Right, 21 days, it just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah,
but thankfully, there's actual science that's dug into this, and that's what we're here to unpack today.
So if 21 days isn't the be-all and end-all, how long does it really take to form a habit, according to science?
Well, for that, we have to look at the work of Phillippa Lally, a researcher who did a fascinating study with some much-needed rigor in this area. We're talking 96 people, tracked for 12 weeks, all diligently recording their progress with their new habits.
Okay, now that's what I call data. But, habits are such personal things. How do you even go about measuring something like that in a scientific way? 96 people, 12 weeks of habit tracking sounds intense. But what kind of habits are we talking about here? I imagine there's a difference between, say, remembering to floss every day and writing the next great American novel, right?
You are so right, and that's what's so cool about Lally's study. They got people to choose from a whole mix of everyday habits. Some were pretty simple, things like drinking water at lunch or taking a walk before dinner.
Okay, so pretty relatable stuff.
Exactly, stuff we could all see ourselves trying to make stick. And then they also had some slightly more challenging ones in the mix, like meditating for a few minutes each day, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. But how did they actually measure it? Was it all just, hey, did you do your habit today? Be honest. Or did they have some more objective way of knowing if people were really forming these habits?
No lie detectors involved, but they did make sure it wasn't just about good intentions or relying on people's memories. See, they had everyone keep track of whether they did their habit each day, but they also had them rate how automatic it felt.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about checking the box, it's about how ingrained it feels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because a true habit, it's not something you have to think about, it's just something you do, almost without realizing it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so after all that data crunching, what'd they find? What's the real magic number?
Okay, get ready for this because it kind of throws that whole 21-day thing for a loop. On average, it took people 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic.
66 days? Wow, that's more than triple the myth.
I know, right? Really puts things in perspective. But hold on, there's more.
There's always more, I'm learning.
Right. See, the average is interesting and all, but the real eye-opener is the range.
Okay, so how much variation are we talking about here?
Buckle up, because some people, get this, formed their new habit in as little as 18 days.
No way. That's got to be some kind of record.
I know. Talk about fast learners. But then, on the flip side, some folks took almost a year, 254 days to be exact, for that behavior to really feel like second nature.
18 days to almost a year. That's a heck of a difference.
It really is. Even the researchers were kind of blown away by that range, which tells you something.
So there's obviously more to it than just willpower or something, right? Some habits must be inherently easier to form than others.
You're getting it. It's not random. Things like how complex the habit itself is, your personality, even just what's going on in your life at the time, it all plays a role. Realistically, building a habit of drinking water at lunch, probably going to be a faster process than, say, training for a marathon.
Yeah, one's a small tweak, the other's like a whole life overhaul.
Exactly. And that's why this research is so powerful. It takes the pressure off this one-size-fits-all deadline and says, hey, it's about your journey.
So instead of beating ourselves up for not achieving Insta habits, it's about understanding that consistency over time is key, which now that I think about it, is way more sustainable, less likely to make you want to chuck it all in on day 22.
Right. And this isn't just about feeling better, it's about setting ourselves up for success. Because honestly, when we buy into that 21-day myth and then inevitably we hit a bump in the road, miss a day or two, it's easy to think, well, I blew it, might as well just give up.
It's like that whole New Year's resolution effect. Start out gung-ho, burn out by February, back to square one. So, if the 21-day myth is setting us up for failure, what's a better approach? What does this research tell us about how we can actually make habits that stick? So, we've busted the myth, dug into the science, but now for the part I'm really interested in, what do we do with all this? How do we actually use this info to, level up our habit game?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, more than anything, I think this research should make us feel not discouraged, but kind of relieved, you know?
Relieved. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Think about it. It takes the pressure off. No more arbitrary deadline looming over us. We can just focus on the process, on showing up consistently.
I like that. It's less about instant gratification, more about playing the long game.
Exactly. And speaking of the long game, if you take just a few things away from this whole deep dive, let them be these. First up, cut yourself some slack, okay? You will stumble, you'll miss a day, maybe even a whole week, it happens. And that's normal, doesn't mean you failed.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, though, miss one workout and suddenly it's, well, I've ruined everything, might as well just order pizza.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah.
But that's the myth messing with our heads, making us think it's all or nothing. Instead, think of those slip-ups as information, right? A chance to adjust, figure out what tripped you up. Progress over perfection, always.
So it's less about beating ourselves up and more about just, getting back on track, focusing on those small wins that build up over time.
You got it. And that brings me to my second point. Habits, they're not built overnight. It's the consistent action, day after day, that makes the difference. So less about willpower, more about building systems, routines that support you, even when you're not feeling super motivated.
So instead of did I crush my goal today, it's more like, am I sticking to the plan, building those positive routines?
You're getting it. And this leads to what's maybe the most important point, especially for someone like you, all about that efficiency. Consistency, long-term, beats out intensity every single time. It's way more effective to make those small, sustainable changes that you can actually stick with than to go all in, burn out, and end up right back where you started.
Slow and steady wins the habit race. It's a cliche for a reason. It just feels so much more doable, so much less intimidating than this idea that you have to completely transform your life in 3 weeks.
Couldn't agree more. So on that note, as you're thinking about all this, here's something to chew on. What's one habit you'd love to build? And what would your day one of making that happen actually look like? What's that one small step you can take?
Love that. Something for all of us to think about. Until next time, everyone, happy habit building, and thanks for joining us for another deep dive.